Hey everyone, how's the sound? Okay, good. So I'm Wendy. In case any of you weren't sure, I'm going to be talking about being the first person at your startup to have a baby. So if that's not the talk that you were expecting, feel free to escape now. You won't hurt my feelings. But assuming that this is the talk that you are here to listen to, let me introduce myself first. I'm Wendy. I'm a senior software engineer at Aspiration, which is a fintech startup in Los Angeles. And so I wanted to start this talk by giving a disclaimer that this talk is based on my experience as someone who lives in the US, in California, with all of the cultural attitudes towards parents and policies that go along with that. So I realize there are really big differences potentially in cultures, as well as differences in maternity and paternity leaves. So if there's anything, part of my experience that doesn't ring true for you, I would love to hear about your experiences after my talk. And I'll be around, so just grab me. So with that caveat out of the way, let's get to why I decided to give this talk about parental leave. So a little over 3 years ago, while I was working at a startup, I found out I was pregnant. And at first, I was like this, super excited, but then that quickly turned to anxiety. So you might be wondering why. Isn't having a baby a happy experience? Well, this startup, like a lot of startups, had no formal family leave policy. So that's not to say that there weren't any parents at the startup. There were, but as you all probably know, tech, especially startups, tends to skew young and male. So a lot of the parents that were working at my startup left for 2 weeks for a vacation time and then went right back to work. And obviously that wasn't going to work for me. And in the US, there's no law at the federal level that requires any paid family leave, so it's up to individual states or companies to make up more generous leaves if they want to do so. For us, we had an HR person, which also not a lot of startups have, but from everything that I heard, even people with HR representatives didn't really know what the correct maternity or paternity leave should be. And so I knew I was going to have to figure it out for myself. Little did I know, that was the first of many things I'd have to figure out. And so it took a lot of work from being completely lost to feeling like I could have a degree in family leave policy. So this is the talk that I wish someone had given me when I was newly pregnant. And hopefully I'll be able to share some tips that will help you figure out what your leave is and what you can expect and what steps you can take to make your life easier if you're the first person to have a baby at your startup. So before I jump into things, I made a legend just to show what I'm a bit about what I wanted to do differently, what I would do again, tips and hints and observations, as well as things that I just found to be important. So first up is figuring out your leave. Before you talk to anybody at your company, I'd highly suggest that you do your homework to figure out what leave you're entitled to. No one cares about your leave more than you do. So even if you have someone at your company like HR who should know, it's best to just assume that they have no idea that what you're entitled to. And if you're wrong, that's great. They can just confirm what you already figured out. But if you're right, then you can educate your company and hopefully make it easier for the next person at your company who goes through this. Incidentally, for me, after I had my son, I found out that there was a California maternity leave Facebook group. And I joined it even though by that point I already knew what leave I was entitled to because I was curious. I wanted to see how much of it I got right and how much of it I got wrong. And if you can see, there are over 3,000 members of the group, and the moderators actually had to close down the group because they just don't have enough time to answer everybody's questions. But the thing that you see being in this group over and over again is that HR completely gets people's leave wrong over and over again. So again, it's up to you to figure out what leave you're entitled to because knowledge is power. So how do you figure out what leave you're actually entitled to? So the first thing that I did was, of course, Google everything. The second way that I went about researching was that I talked to my friends, and I cross-checked what I found on Google with what my friends at bigger companies with bigger HR departments had figured out. By checking what you've already researched with what bigger companies have said is the policy, you can be pretty sure if they match that that's actually the correct policy. And then the third place that I found information, which won't apply to anybody here, but if you're in California, is the California State Disability website, since that's where I actually had to go and file all of my paperwork. And so I know most of the audience here is from South Korea, so I'm not going to talk too much about what California leave was, but I just wanted to give you this image that helped me figure out what California leave was. So at the top, we have a whole set of policies that protect your job with no pay. It's a mix of federal and state policies. And at the bottom, we also have a mix of federal and state policies, but these are the policies that will actually pay you some amount of money. And so it's totally confusing. If you didn't know that there were state level policies, you would think that the federal level policies, which don't pay you anything and only give you job protection, are the only things that exist. There are also a bunch of requirements that if they aren't met, you aren't entitled to anything. And so it's a big mess, and you really, again, should figure out what your leave is. And so with that, I did a little bit of Googling about South Korean policy. I'm by no means an expert, but this is what I was able to find out. So pregnant women are eligible for 90 days of leave. The first 60 are fully paid, and the last 30 days are partially paid. And at least 45 of those have to be taken after the birth of the baby. Fathers are entitled to 5 days of paternity leave, and pregnant workers have rights to work 2 hours less per day without a wage cut, no overtime, nighttime, or holiday work, and you also get medical exams during work without any additional pay cuts. The government also provides monetary assistance to expectant couples, such as vouchers for pregnancy checkups, which is pretty awesome because the US doesn't do anything like that. The government also provides monthly allowances to parents for the first year after the child is born for other related expenses as well. And then parents of children less than 3 years old can request up to 1 year of full-time or part-time childcare leave with a 30-day notice period, which is super awesome because that also is not available in the US. And the best part of this, I thought, was the free public daycare that's available. So there is a wait time typically of 1 to 2 years, but if both parents work, kids get to jump to the front of the wait list. There's a ton more stuff, but these were just the highlights of what I was able to find doing my research for this talk. So make sure that, again, you figure out what you're entitled to. And this leads me to my next point, which is take as much leave as you can afford to, whether you're the pregnant woman or their partner, but especially if you're the partner. And I'm not saying this because of the cliches around you'll never get this time back, even though it's true. I'm saying it because taking care of kids is really hard, and having 2 people there makes it way easier. There are a lot of articles that talk about this, but my favorite one was titled, "After Men in Spain Got Paternity Leave, They Wanted Fewer Kids." And the best quote out of here was, Farah and Gonzalez think that spending more time with their children, or the prospect of having to do so, may have made men more acutely aware of the effort and costs associated with child rearing, and as the researchers put it, shifted their preferences from child quantity to quality. So I realize not everyone can afford to take time off, but if you can afford to, you won't regret taking that time off. Your child, your relationship will be so much less stressful because of it. So moving on to talking to your work. Again, when I got to this part, I was really nervous and I didn't really understand why. Again, shouldn't this be a happy thing? But again, the problem is that people start making assumptions as soon as they hear that you're pregnant. So for example, this article shows that children hurt women's earnings, but not men's, even in Scandinavia, which is one of the most progressive countries out there. There can be a lot of reasons for this. People might assume that you're gonna just end up staying at home, or that you're not as motivated, or that you don't wanna take on as challenging assignments, which usually is not the case. And so all of this is just to say that it's totally normal to be nervous about telling your company that you're expecting a baby. And so it wasn't until after I talked to my friends that I realized why this was something that I was feeling so nervous about. And I also want to take this chance to talk to any managers out in the audience, which is that if you're on the receiving end of this news, you should be just super excited. This should be you. And then once the dust has settled, just go back to treating the person who told you normally. The greatest gift that my manager and coworkers gave me at the time, after I told them, was treating the fact that I was pregnant as no bigger deal than the fact that I have brown eyes. It just didn't matter to them. The only thing that they did do was they stopped offering me beer when we went out to lunch and dinner. So with that said, there's no hard or fast rules for when and how you should tell your company, so I just wanted to give a few tips that worked for me. So for me, I would definitely repeat telling them as soon as I was comfortable. There may or may not be a minimal notice period for you. There definitely is in the US. Of course, if you're the person who's pregnant, you're probably going to tell your company way more than the 30-day minimum requirement in the US. But even if you're the partner, it's a lot easier to explain why you're suddenly needing to take all of these mornings off to go to appointments and everything. People will wonder if something is suddenly wrong with you, if you're like, I need to be going to doctor's appointments regularly, if they don't know that you're going because you're seeing the doctor for your future baby. I would also repeat talking to your HR. I'm not sure how widespread HR people are in South Korea, but if you have someone who manages these kind of things, definitely talk to them along with your manager. I had a really supportive manager, so I actually told him before we talked to HR, and this was also a really good time to figure out if my company would be willing to pay anything while I was gone. And as luck would have it, they ended up supplementing my income for 12 weeks, so I had full salary for 12 weeks, which is not the case for a lot of people in the US, or even California. Also, keep copies of all correspondence regarding your leave and job performance. While you're out on maternity leave or paternity leave, you don't want to suddenly be let go of your job without any sort of evidence that this was actually something that your company said was okay and approved of. You're not necessarily going to have access to your email anymore, so whether it's printing out emails or forwarding it to yourself, just have something to show that this was approved before. And for me, that's it for talking to your company. So we're going to move on to gearing up for your baby. This is going to be a little different than most of the lists that you see out there related to getting ready for baby, which are usually things that you should and shouldn't buy. You can totally Google all of that, so that's not what this is going to be. It's mostly a list of things that I observed about being pregnant and which someone had told me about. So first up, if you're the person who's pregnant, you're going to be more tired than you've ever been in your first trimester. You might not realize just how tired that is. For me, I worked 2 blocks from the beach when I was pregnant, and I seriously considered for about a month straight walking to the beach during lunchtime, taking a nap, and then heading back to work. That's how tired I was. So again, another thing I didn't realize was normal, but it totally is, so just be ready. Also, you're going to outgrow every piece of clothing you have towards the end, even your maternity clothes. This really depressed me. No one warned me about this. It's normal. Just go to your local thrift shop and buy some really big pieces of clothing to tide you over for the last month, and you'll be good. This was me a week before my son came. I don't know if you can tell, but that fabric is not holding together very well. Also, now is the time to start talking to your employer about setting up a mother's room if you plan to breastfeed. So where I worked, like a lot of startups, they had an open floor plan. The only rooms that were available were conference rooms that had glass walls. So clearly that wouldn't work as a mother's room. And so it's good to give your company some lead time to make changes so that you can have an appropriate mother's room if that's what you need. So I want to also take this time to talk about South Korea's breastfeeding rate. So there's only 18.3% as of 2016 breastfed exclusively until 6 months, while the global average is 41%, even though 95% of mothers breastfeed immediately after birth and in earlier months. And the biggest reasons that that rate was so low were that there was either no more milk or that they didn't think it was necessary any longer, or work conditions. So the fact that work conditions is along the top 3 reasons for why women stop breastfeeding is why it's really important to talk to your company about getting a mother's room if that is important to you. So with that said, this is my realistic mother's room. Obviously in a startup, you're always strapped for cash, so I can't just give you my pie-in-the-sky dream mother's room. But for me, the minimum that you would want to have a good mother's room is a lock that only the pumping moms have access to, because I had to kick out people so many times that I got super tired of it. Curtains and blinds over the windows and any glass walls, that's sort of obvious, but something that needs to be said. Comfy chairs, because you're going to be sitting in there for a long time every day, and office chairs just aren't comfortable. A fridge to store pumped milk and pump parts, because people get a little weird when you store your pumped milk with their lunch for whatever reason, even though it's both food. Also, if there are multiple women pumping, it would be really nice to have lockers so people can store all of their pump stuff in there without having to lug it all around. And if privacy partitions or cubicles if you only have one room available. And if you only have one room available and can't do anything about it, then at least have a calendar for scheduling the room. And then finally, bonus points for a sink, because you might have to wash some of your pump stuff, and people get really weird about you washing, again, your pump stuff in the same sink where they're washing other really gross things, but they don't think it's as gross as your breast milk. So a sink is really nice too. So moving on, something that I would do totally differently is not keeping on top of my employer once I filed for disability. So this is a little California specific. I'm not sure if there's paperwork that your employer needs to sign when you're going to go out on maternity or paternity leave, but for California there is. And I didn't pay attention to the mail I was getting, and it turns out that my claim was denied. I only had 21 days to repeal it, and I didn't realize it until I was about 14 days in. So I was holding my 2-week-old on hold for hours at a time, multiple times a day, trying to talk to a real person. So definitely don't recommend it. If there's paperwork that your employer or really anyone needs signed, just make sure that you keep track of that before the baby's born. Another thing that I would not do again is that I didn't get on the daycare wait list early enough. So when I went to my first daycare visit, I was 4 months pregnant. I thought that was plenty of time. And then the woman who was doing the tour asked me, "So, are you pregnant yet?" And I thought that she was kidding until I found out that the wait list was 15 months long. And as I pointed out earlier, the wait lists for daycares in South Korea can run up to 1 or 2 years. So if you can do anything ahead of time, make sure that you get on that list as soon as possible. And this isn't to say that there's not going to be a spot in a daycare somewhere, but all of the top-rated ones are always filled up way in advance, and so those are the ones that I'm really talking about. Something that I would do again is joining my local Facebook baby gear resale group. I don't know if Facebook is used as widely here, but if you have any sort of social media or groups where people have shared interests, I would definitely look for shared groups, because people would sell these big garbage bags of baby clothes for $25 because they wanted to get rid of it and get something for it. It saved me and my husband a ton of money. So definitely look into that if you're having a baby soon. Also, this was something that was totally out of left field for me, but if you want newborn photos, schedule it now for the sleepy 2-week period. In the first 2 weeks, babies sleep through everything. I think a car could explode and they would still stay asleep. This is the best time for them to take pictures, but it's also the time when photographers are super full, because that's when the best pictures come out. So if this is something you want to do, make sure that you find a photographer that you like and book them now. So the last thing that I wouldn't do is starting a big remodeling project when my due date was less than 2 months away. So you might laugh and wonder who would decide to do a big renovation when they're pregnant. And the answer is a lot of people, including me and my husband. This is what our master bathroom looked like 50 days from when I was due. And so there's something about knowing that a baby's coming and that wanting to make sure that your space is a good space for them to grow up in, as well as knowing how much harder it is going to be to remodel once the baby's here, that makes a lot of people decide to suddenly do big construction projects right before the baby's due. I know at least 2 other people who did it around the same time as me, and none of them, including ours, finished on time, because babies are generally on time, whereas construction projects generally aren't. And as much as you might think you need to upgrade your kitchen or your bathroom now, it just adds a bunch of stress that you really don't need. So don't do it. So the last section is baby's here, hooray. The first few days in the hospital were such a blur for me that I was really grateful that I got to stay in the hospital for 4 days, because there the nurses do everything for you. And then I remember when we were leaving the hospital thinking, are they seriously letting me, a person who doesn't know anything, just take this helpless tiny little thing home? Yep, they are. Congratulations, you're a parent. Don't panic. Just kidding, you're a new parent, you're gonna panic about everything. So all I can say is just breathe, it'll be okay. I also found out a few surprising things about life with a newborn that I couldn't find on Google anywhere. And if someone had told me this, I would have felt a lot better knowing that everything was normal. So I'm gonna let you in on a few of those things I found out. So you have to wake newborns up every 3 hours to feed them if they don't wake themselves up. This totally blew my mind. Like, knowing that I would have to be up every 3 hours because the baby woke me up was already pretty bad. But then realizing that I would have to set my own alarm and wake ourselves up was just torturous. But it's just something that you're going to have to do. So just be prepared and sleep a lot now. Also, babies don't like to sleep by themselves. They love sleeping in your arms. So in the US, we use cribs. Pretty much everybody's crib was unused for the first 3 months, including ours. So the good news is that if you haven't put together whatever it is that you typically put your baby to sleep in, you've got lots of time. The bad news is you're not going to get to sleep at all because you're going to just be holding this baby while they're sleeping and hoping that they don't wake up. But again, just be prepared and know that it's normal. Also, babies have a superhuman ability to detect when you're trying to sit down. So remember, you have to wake yourself up every 3 hours to feed them and then put them back to sleep. They won't let you sit down when you're doing that. You have to keep walking back and forth, back and forth. Even though you think that they're asleep, the second you start squatting into a sitting position, they will wake right up. So just, again, be prepared and know you're going to be doing a lot of walking back and forth in the dark. So those were the 3 biggest surprising things about life with newborns. I have a ton more, but I don't have enough time to talk about them, so come find me if you want to find out more of the things that I figured out. I also had some advice that I wish I could have given to my former self, which is that the first 6 weeks are a huge roller coaster. They're way harder than anyone ever warns you about. I think I cried maybe every other day. It's totally normal. The thing is, no one tells you until you're talking to them about it, and so I'm here to tell you it's normal. But also, be on the lookout for signs of postpartum depression. It affects a lot more women and even some men than you would realize, and so make sure that you're checking yourself and your partner for that. Also, breastfeeding is harder than anyone tells you. It's a big part of why I cried every other day for the first 6 weeks. It's normal and it's okay to feel like you have no idea what you're doing, but it's also okay to decide if you want to stop. Also, say no to everybody who wants to come over in the first 6 weeks. It's really hard feeling like you have to clean everything up and play hostess or host when you're super tired, you're not feeling good about yourself. But if you're not able to actually say no to people, feel free to take a nap when people come over. You don't have to entertain them. That's what the baby's for. Just throw the baby at them, go to sleep. And the last thing is excuse me, it's okay to put the baby down in a safe space and walk away for a few minutes if you need to compose yourself. So I had a friend tell me that, and I didn't really understand what she was talking about until I was feeling super overwhelmed one day, and having that permission was really helpful. So I'm giving all of you permission to do that as well. I lied, this is the last part. So everyone's gonna have advice. Feel free to ignore everything that people say, including what I'm saying in all of this talk, and just do what you want. So hold your baby as much as you want or not. Sleep train or not. Restrict screen time or not. Do what works for your family. And so I do have one last section, but going back to work could be its own whole talk, so I just have a few survival tips. Number 1, be gentle with yourself. The first few days, weeks, months, years are tough for everyone. And even if you're super excited to be back at work, it's okay to feel weird now that you don't have a baby attached to your hip 24/7. Also, don't expect to be 100% right away. You're gonna think that everyone thinks that you're behind or going too slow. It's not true, and if that is what you're thinking, that is not the best place to work anyway. I don't know if working remotely is super widespread here, but if you can work remotely when possible, it just makes things a lot easier. For me, I remember when I had a 1-hour commute each way, and I would just spend time sitting in traffic thinking like I could be at home hanging out with my kid right now. So if you can reduce your traffic time or anything like that, working remotely is really great. Also, if you have to travel, there are milk shipping services that exist. I did not know about this at all. Luckily, I didn't need it. But you can pump milk if you're on a business trip and then ship it back to your house. So whoever's taking care of your baby can actually continue to feed them your milk if that's what you want to do. And then finally, put your life on easy mode. So whether that's getting takeout, delivery of toilet paper and everything, using paper plates, forks, so you don't have to do dishes, just do everything that you can. You're in survival mode for at least the first 6 months. Do everything that you can to make your life easy. I have about 1 million more tips, like I said, but I am out of time. So if you have any questions or comments, my Twitter's up here, my LinkedIn's up here. Feel free to reach out and talk to me. And that's it. Thanks a bunch.